On September the 30th, 2006, more than 100 international climbers watched on as a band of Tibetan refugees attempted a daring escape from their homeland over the remote Nangpa Pass in the Himalayas. In the thin air, at 5,700 meters, armed Chinese border police pursued the refugees.
I immediately knew that somebody was going to die, and I turned to the clients and I said, "You don't want to watch this."
They were shooting straight at us.
As the Chinese aimed their weapons at the unarmed Tibetans, mountaineers filmed the horrifying events.
They're shooting them like dogs. Yeah.
In the making of this program, witnesses to the shooting contributed their video footage, and survivors helped reconstruct their harrowing ordeals. In September 2006, hundreds of international expeditions descended on Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal. Here, mountaineering is big business.
God save the Queen.
For Romanian television cameraman Sergiu Matai, this was his first time climbing in the Himalayas.
Junior n-ai vrea să știi în ce poziție este camera asta acum.
I can describe myself as a storyteller, but most of the times I'm just the man that observes things and uses the camera to express himself in pictures better than in words. For me, climbing mountains outside is pretty much climbing your mountains inside.
Experienced British climbers Lee Farmer and Steve Laws were with a hand-picked expedition.
I've always been one for setting my own personal challenges, and each time the next one's got to be either something different or something harder, and that's just the way I've lived my life.
I always think I'm a bit of a terrier, and I keep chasing something and keep going after it.
Got to keep looking, can't find the bag of life.
But I like to give the impression that I'm a bit of a risk taker. But if anybody knows about mountaineering and climbing, they'll know that everything in mountaineering and climbing is a calculated risk.
We were covered in spindrift, 2:30 in the morning, right? And it was windy.
Luis Benitez, a professional mountain guide from the USA, had been working in the Himalayas for years, shepherding small groups of less experienced climbers to extreme altitudes. Luis has climbed most of the world's great peaks, conquering Everest 6 times, including a successful attempt to lead the first blind man to the summit.
Woo! On top of the world! I've been told I'm a caregiver, just because I think when you're a mountain guide, you tend to sacrifice everything about yourself for others, because I love what I do.
These mountaineers had paid large sums of money to their expedition companies. Their common objective was to scale the 6th highest mountain in the world, Mount Cho Oyu, on the border of Nepal and politically sensitive Tibet. Inside Tibet, there was also money to be made. Tibetans secretly paid their hard-earned savings to escape their Chinese-controlled homeland. Unlike the mountain climbers, the Tibetans cannot get passports. Seeking refuge outside Tibet is a serious crime. In the back streets of Lhasa, 14-year-old Jamyang met his guide in a tea shop. He handed over the money it had taken him 4 years' hard work to save. Jamyang was wary.
He wanted about £500 for just one person. I didn't trust him. He was only interested in my money.
Trusting your life to a shadowy, illegal guide is a high-risk way to leave Tibet. The mountain passes in the Himalayas are littered with frozen bodies. There are no guarantees. Since the age of 10, Jamyang knew he had to leave Tibet.
The Chinese occupation stopped me from getting a proper education. I went to a Chinese school. But if we didn't understand, the teachers didn't care. They abused us by hitting us on our heads with dirty brooms. And they beat us up.
18-year-old Dolma and her friends came from the same rural district in Tibet. They dreamt of coming to India together, to an education and a future denied to them at home.
3 of us girls made the decision together. At home, escaping Tibet is always on our minds. Whenever I saw photos of His Holiness, I just wanted to see him in person. One day, Kelsang Namtso and I were in the field. She called me over and said, "There are people going to India. Do you still want to go or what?" And I replied, "Oh yes, I really want to go." We drove in taxis all night and reached Lhasa at about 4 p.m. We'd been warned the Chinese police may be looking for us, because apparently the police in our hometown knew we'd left. The guide said, take only enough barley meal and dried meat to last 4 days, and bring only 1 blanket for 2 people.
In Nepal, half a day's drive from Kathmandu, the mountaineers reached the border. The river under the so-called Friendship Bridge gushes down a cultural fault line between easygoing Nepal and highly regulated Tibet.
An atmospheric veil comes down halfway across the bridge where you realise that you're walking into a Chinese-controlled area.
But it just felt a little bit hostile. There was nothing friendly about it. There was no hi, welcome to Tibet or welcome to China. It was next, stamp, stamp, and that was it.
But no amount of Chinese control can stem the flow of Tibetans who will risk their lives attempting to escape.
The truck was so overcrowded that once you sat down, you couldn't stand up again. There were at least 13 young children inside.
In all, there were 75 people in the truck. Our guide had lied to us.
We had absolutely no idea where they were taking us.
Neither the Tibetans cramped in the back of a truck, nor the mountain climbers comfortable in their luxury vehicles knew that their very different journeys would soon collide at the same compass point on a Himalayan mountain pass. For centuries in the shadow of Mount Cho Oyu, yak caravans have lumbered up and down the Nangpa Pass, trading between Tibet and Nepal. A popular escape route for illegal refugees, the pass has become a hotspot for Chinese border security.
I think the first thing that hit me was how Tibetan people eked out a pastoral living on this land. It's just rock and dust.
The Chinese economic miracle has brought little benefit to ordinary Tibetans. For the mountaineers, the small town of Nai Alam was their first chance to stop and see Tibet for themselves.
I didn't know that Nialam means Hell's Gate, but to me right then, it looked exactly like its name, forsaken land. The gods forgot about their people.
Their next stop was the frontier town of Tingri.
Because Tingri is the last turn up towards the border, Chinese military are everywhere. The biggest thing that they try to watch over and control are the Western climbers that come through. Climbers are dangerous to them because we go places that a regular tourist doesn't go. We go through villages and we talk to people, so the level of control that's placed upon us when we go in and when we come out, I feel is tremendously elevated.
The truck was driving across country, sometimes on riverbanks, through forests and back roads.
On their third night on the road, the Tibetans' truck just stopped. From here on, they would struggle through wild terrain, dodging Chinese border police for the next 10 days.
The Cho-Oyu Advanced Base Camp is quite a long, narrow camp. Everybody's in a long line rather than in a big circle or a square. We were towards the top end of the camp.
It's a hodgepodge, it's a confetti of colours, all different shapes and sizes of tents. It always reminds me a bit of something out of Star Wars, where all the traders, all people just come and congregate. And of course, in amongst all the tents are flags of different countries, there's flags of sponsors, there's music playing, there's cooking, there's everything. There's every nation that you can imagine is there.
I noticed the Chinese Advanced Base Camp tent and flag, and me as a Romanian, I had a Romanian flag with me, but I didn't just pop it out there. You know, you're in Tibet, you gotta have a bit of respect for their own country. But the Chinese just got this big stick out of nowhere, and they just put their flag up there and said, what if we'll go overnight and take the flag off? And they all went, no, don't do that. Don't do it.
At first, we hiked through green grasslands.
Sometimes we walked all day and all night. And sometimes we even kept going, walking right through the next day too.
Ill-equipped for altitude and with their food supplies already dwindling, the Tibetans trudged higher. They had no idea how many more days their march would take. A few days' walk away and high above on Mount Cho-Oyu at 6,400 meters, Sergiu Matai faced his own terrifying ordeal with altitude sickness. As Sergiu pushed uphill, he kept on filming, even as his lungs congested with fluid.
I was just relaxing myself and enjoying the beautiful views. But meanwhile, a pulmonary edema started growing within my lung.
And then he started to hallucinate.
The snow around me started to turn green, And I didn't know why. I said, if the snow is green, they should have cows here as well, you know.
Sergiu wasn't alone. English policeman Steve Laws suffered the same life-threatening condition.
I started to get a headache. It just got worse and worse and worse. And I took paracetamol, basic painkillers, didn't do it.
And all of a sudden, I just lost my sight. It just went black, pitch black. But all I knew was that I have to go down no matter what.
Neither Sergiu nor Steve would make the summit. They were forced to turn back to base camp.
Trip was over. I was absolutely gutted. 2 years in the planning, all the training, and it was all over. I often sat in the tent, had a little cry.
Both Sergiu and Steve remained in base camp as logistic support for other team members still trying to scale the mountain. Being grounded in camp would later throw them into the spotlight. As the climbing season drew to a close, the mountain was plagued by bad weather. For days on end, blizzards kept the climbers huddled inside their tents, delaying their last chance to make a bid for the summit.
One of the worst storms I've seen on Choyu. I think mountains smack down climbers when something on the hill is just not right. You know, I kind of got to looking around thinking, wow, somebody must be misbehaving this year because this is a big, big storm.
Below the snow line, the Tibetans kept a constant lookout for Chinese patrols.
The guide said that the Nangpa Pass was very close. If we walked all night, we should get there by morning. But there were Chinese patrols in the area. So we decided to rest till dark. Everyone put in their last scraps of food and we made a very thin soup. Around 7 p.m. we got up and headed for the pass. We were very afraid of snow blindness and, of course, of frostbite. I tied my shoelaces up very tightly just to keep my feet warm.
Close to the Nepalese border, the illegal escapees were spotted. The Chinese border police sent in a well-armed convoy to apprehend them. By the morning of September the 30th, the storms had cleared. This was the climbers' last chance to go for the summit.
I remember being excited like I always am for summit pushes. The Sherpas, whenever it's a climbing day, and they get the juniper going on the Chorten, which is like the stone altar where the prayer flags are spread all over base camp. And for me, when I smell that smell on an expedition at base camp, I know that it's game on.
Beautiful morning, awesome day. Had my shades on, not to get blind. Went in the kitchen tent. I told to the cook, I said, mate, I want to drink some coffee.
Broken into smaller groups a few kilometers away, the exhausted refugees pushed up towards the Nepalese border. It was their 10th day on foot.
When we got to the base of the pass and caught up with our guide, he just pointed to the mountain pass and said, "There it is, the Nangba Pass. Go ahead."
The unsuspecting Tibetans were walking blindly into a trap.
I was actually in the mess tent and I heard a big crack.
It's like this. And everybody stopped what they were doing and we all kind of looked at each other like, did we just hear what we think we just heard?
I heard 2 cracks. It was definitely gunshots.
We didn't know they were gunshots. We thought it was the mountaineers setting off firecrackers for fun.
Aung Sadeng, my sitar, comes in and he said, very, very bad, soldiers shooting. And as soon as he said that, then you hear the machine gun fire.
Then, when we realised the Chinese were shooting at us, I got really scared. I patted Kelsang on the back and said, "Please, go faster. We're in big trouble. The Chinese are chasing after us."
Now fearing for their lives, the Tibetans scattered, taking cover in the rocky terrain.
As soon as I saw the soldiers shouldering his weapon and starting firing, I just went, "Oi, stop!" And he just turned around, sort of, "Back off, it's not your problem, mind your own mountain." And in that second, I just dropped my coffee, went for my camera, and I filmed everything.
And then I heard people start shouting, "Run," encouraging the Tibetans to keep running, and it was almost like a game. Because where we were sitting, the angle that we were looking at things, we thought the soldiers are just having a show. They're too far away. They made it. It's great. Ha ha, Chinese. And then I see a second group of soldiers closer to the edge of the pass, and I knew that somebody was going to die immediately. I immediately knew that somebody was going to die, and I turned to the clients and I said, "You don't want to watch this."
And this time we actually saw the guys take the shots, and it was aimed shots. They were up in the shoulder, aimed shots.
The bullets zipped past our ears. We were scared they wanted to kill us.
They were shooting straight at us.
There was one really deadly gun. It just fired non-stop like this. The bullets hit very close to our feet.
Things were really close to me. I filmed them from the kitchen tent. I torn the net open. I burned it with my lighter so I can have an opening, and I was filming. This is the first shot that I filmed. This is the first guy that got shot.
The person towards the back had been shot and wounded, was still hobbling, but it was obvious wasn't going to make it. We later learned that that person was shot in the leg.
Okay, and now he makes it up to the ridge, falls down there. Okay, and now he checks for his wound.
And the rest of the group kept on running, or trying to run, just stumble through the snow, kept on moving towards the top of the pass.
They're shooting them like dogs. Yeah. You can see the first person in the row falling down, and after that, he gets back up again and he goes. It was not a major wound, obviously. Then the last person in the column, that's what I learned in army. In order to stop a convoy, you take out the first and the last person.
Someone behind me cried out, and my whole body felt electrocuted.
That's a 17-year-old nun. Game over.
The other nuns caught up with me. I asked what happened to Kelsang. They said she was shot in the leg, but we have to keep going.
I don't know what I felt, man. I was just like whacked in the head with something. Honestly, I just said, this is sick.
In the UK, if you shoot somebody who's going away in the back, posing no threat to you whatsoever, even if they've just burgled your house, that is going to be murder.
I thought, where the hell are we? We're in the middle of nowhere. We're at a base camp that's days' walk away from the nearest town, a town which you can describe as something out of a cowboy film. And certainly I thought this is once upon a time in Tibet.
I thought if Kelsang is injured, she'll be arrested and die in jail. So I just wanted to stay and go to prison with her. But a monk behind pushed me and said, "What's wrong with you? Think of your own life." Then he just dragged me by the hand. So Kelsang was left behind.
Further down the valley, 14-year-old Jamyang's group faced close-range gunfire.
We looked up above us, and about 80 soldiers were blocking our way. One of the senior officers shouted through a loudspeaker in Chinese. He ordered us to kneel down. So we knelt down, put our hands on our heads. Then the soldiers handcuffed and beat us.
The climbers were stunned by the cold-blooded killing they had just witnessed. Fear and indecision rippled through the base camp.
What can we do? You've got guys armed with AK-47s, Kalashnikov assault rifles, and we've got absolutely nothing. We were all spread out. There was absolutely nothing that anybody could do.
The first instinct of many of the climbers was to keep their heads down and get on with what they were doing. Luis Benitez, however, assumed others would report the story.
I basically told everybody, look, we got to get moving. I want to get out of here. Grab your packs. Let's let this settle out while we're on the mountain. Because obviously I anticipated that the world's going to know by the time we come back down. Out of all the years I had been in the mountains, it was definitely the first time, the only time, that I didn't want to be where I was.
Luis made a scheduled radio call to his assistant, Paul Rogers, already high up on Mount Cho Oyu.
Luis was obviously quite upset, and you know, the words were that the Chinese are shooting the place up. There were probably some swearing as well. And I just said, well, I'll see you at Camp 2. All is good up here, and you know, plenty of questions, but the radio probably wasn't the right place to ask them, really. It was you know, I could pick up a lot of tension at base camp just by Luis's voice.
As climbing teams headed for the mountain, soldiers scoured the base camp, zipping and unzipping tents, hunting for any Tibetans hiding amongst the mountaineers.
One of the kitchen boys comes and says, "Somebody know the toilet?" I just went for my camera straight away. There were like Chinese border police 30 meters away, and I just kept going.
În toaleta din spatele meu ați văzut, este un tibetan care stă ascuns de trupele chinezești. A reușit să fugă în partea asta. wanted to go to Dalai Lama and the Chinese troops just shoot you.
The half-frozen Tibetan was 28-year-old farmer Lobsang Chernden. He was escaping Tibet to see the Dalai Lama.
We'll figure something out. Stay here.
There was a bag of paper that Englishmen used to wipe their backsides after going to the toilet. It was full of used ones. I just hugged it and lay down. I didn't mind the filth. It kept me warm. Honestly, I was hugging a bag of shit.
Everybody started, no, don't do anything, leave him alone. Don't get involved in it. And I said, just show me where's the leftovers from our breakfast, right now.
While the reluctant kitchen staff prepared food for Lobsang Chernden stranded in the toilet tent, other climbers secretly filmed as the Chinese border police led their captives through the camp.
A group of children were walked through camp, aged 6 to 10 to 12. They were taken straight into the Chinese camp and put in one of their big dome tents. They were certainly under guard. There was no doubt about that. They looked very frightened. That upset me more than anything because that's the same age as my son. My son was 9 at the time. Some more soldiers came into camp and they went straight into the Chinese camp, which was right next to us. They were basically kids. They looked like late teens, early 20s, which in my mind made them particularly dangerous because kids with Kalashnikovs are more dangerous than 40-year-olds with Kalashnikovs as far as I'm concerned.
As the Tibetan prisoners were marched off to waiting trucks, the Chinese border police turned their attention to Kelsang Namtso's body that lay freezing in the snow.
The way they checked the body was basically just go and kick it. And they picked up what we could now find out was a bag because we could see when they came back.
That's the part that actually Kelsang made it, dragging herself from this point to here. That's Kelsang's path. I couldn't film that. I just couldn't film that. Honestly, I reckon she was still alive, or she could have been still saved when the Chinese border patrol got to her. They were taking photos with Kelsang's body, like, you know, that hunting picture.
The body was left there until about 2:30 the following afternoon, just left out there the whole time.
Secretly filming from his tent, Sergiu noticed fewer police guarding the camp. It was a chance to rescue Lobsang Chernden, the Tibetan who was still hiding in the toilet.
And I just went to the toilet, unzipped the tent, and I told Jordan, come out.
You go to the... Yes? No, don't worry. We'll go and bring you clothes and you'll come into the kitchen. Okay? Like a cook, right?
He put his arm around me and took me to their tent. There he gave me warm food and dry clothes.
And I just watched constantly because there was a Chinese patrol going up and down the glacier. And when they went back, I told Jordan, if you want to go now, go. Don't get shot. I just looked at him going down under the ridge and never saw him again.
Committed to telling his story to the world, Lobsang Chernden painted a dramatic picture of his escape.
The police stood guard right here. As I crawled along the path to the top of the pass, when I got to the border, I was so happy. I prayed out loud, 3 jewels and His Holiness, thank you. Finally, I got your blessing. I shouted out. Then all of a sudden, I was afraid the Chinese might hear me. So I ran away downhill, so fast that I was tumbling and falling.
The following day, it was surreal. They held, it's almost like a presentation ceremony. They were all lined up, and presumably the 2 guys who had done the shooting were stood at the right-hand end. I got the impression they were congratulating them on a job well done. That was the impression I got.
Above Camp 1, Luis and his 2 clients pushed higher.
Sebastian, Scott, and I started up towards Camp 2. And again, just heavy feet. Just heavy feet.
Luis was a different person when he arrived at Camp 2. There was lots of victims in Choi Yu base camp that day, not just the people that were shot. There were lots of victims, and I think Luis was one of the victims of that shooting.
Struggling with the altitude, one of Luis's clients decided he had had enough.
At that point, I turned downhill with Scott, and Paul stayed to leave for the summit the next morning with Sebastian and the Sherpas.
While other climbers fulfilled their dream, reaching the summit of Mount Cho Oyu, a few thousand meters below, 14-year-old Jamyang was held captive in a Chinese jail.
They tortured us for 3 whole days. If they didn't like what we said, they used an electric cattle prod. I have scars here where they zapped me. I really thought they might kill me.
On return to base camp, 3 days after the shooting, Luis Benitez was keen to hear what action had been taken.
And I'm kind of wandering around camp and looking, and it's business as usual.
Rumors were spreading around the camp. Everyone had a different version of the story and of the body count.
2 Tibetan people died down there, and the 1 Tibetan girl also died there.
Luis was astonished that apparently no one had reported the shooting to the outside world.
And I get on the satellite phone to a good friend of mine who runs an adventure website. And I say, can you believe what happened here? This is crazy. And he said, I have no idea what you're talking about. Shooting, who got shot? What are you talking about? What's going on? And I was just furious. Over 100 people watched that happen. And I know for a fact that at least 75% of the people had satellite communication equipment. This atrocity of silence, in my opinion, far outweighed the actual atrocity of the act. There seemed to be this unspoken rule to not make trouble and to not make waves. And I said, stay by your computer. I'm going to send you a story that needs to go up immediately.
Half a world away in New York City, Explorers Web, the adventure website, got the disturbing email from Luis Benitez. Luis asked to remain anonymous.
Then without warning, shots rang out, over and over and over. The story just gets worse. From Tibetans I know here in camp, apparently 7 people, were shot and then shoved into a crevasse. People are dying attempting to reach for a better life.
I was like, whoa, what is this? So I called Tom and I said, Tom, come and look at this. And he said, oh my God, this needs to be published immediately. When I pushed the publish button, I trembled. But then I once again, I checked my heart and I said to myself, no, this is the right thing to do. And so we published it.
Explorers Web understood the global impact this story could have. They immediately forwarded the email to Kate Saunders of the Washington-based International Campaign for Tibet.
I started to try to get in touch with climbers up on Advanced Space Camp Cho Oyu because of the news that they'd witnessed the shooting, which was unprecedented. None of the climbers would contact me. I tried all sorts of people in all sorts of different countries. But I think the atmosphere at Advanced Space Camp was pretty intimidating at that time.
Luis told his assistant, Paul, that he'd sent the story out. Paul was worried and decided to check the story with their base camp manager, Sherpa Ung Sering.
The email said there'd been 7 shot and their bodies were thrown in a crevasse. And Sering say, we think maybe 2 people shot. And you see, 1 person definitely killed.
The word goes that soldiers caught a group of Tibetans behind a hill, out of line of sight of Advanced Base Camp, and summarily executed them and shoved them into a crevasse. And because nobody could confirm it, it was never really pursued. Do I believe it? Absolutely. Do I think the sources that were telling me this story are credible? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Can I prove it? No.
So I'm like, there's a mismatch here in the information. I thought that he was putting the expedition potential to return here at risk. The most important thing for me was that that Luis wasn't going to get into any trouble, that our clients were going to be fine, and we were going to be able to cross the border safely.
Concerned, Paul sought advice from the senior expedition leaders, including Russell Bryce. Russell Bryce confronted Luis.
He said, are you crazy? Do you realize what you done? Are you crazy? And I didn't know what to say. I was floored. Did I just make a mistake? Did I just tell the world that a government did something that they didn't actually do? My God, did I really just do that? And I just remember quietly asking Russell, well, still, Russell, do you think it's right? Do you think it's right to... I just remember clearly asking him that over and over and over again, and he just walked out of camp.
Some months later, Russell Bryce lodged a complaint about the shooting with the Chinese Mountaineering Association. No evidence had been found that anyone had died apart from Kelsang Namtso. The others who were seen falling all survived. 30 kilometers away from base camp, in a Chinese jail, the police demanded that Jamyang identify Kelsang Namtso's body.
The Chinese asked, who was the dead nun? They did warn me the body stank. She was naked and covered with canvas. The interrogating officer pointed to the body and demanded to know, what is her name? Where is she from? How old is she? Tell us the names of all her friends. I just said, I don't know anything.
Sergiu Matai knew the video footage he had secretly filmed was vital evidence. If he could smuggle the tapes safely out of Tibet, he would reveal the first recorded shooting of Tibetan refugees trying to cross the border.
This is the original bag that I hold the tapes in. And I had a pouch on my hip right here, all the bloody time. So this is the bag that tricked the Chinese border patrol guys, actually. And I crossed right under their nose.
Of the refugees who set out, about 30 were taken prisoner and 41 escaped across the border to Nepal. No one was reported missing. When Dolma arrived at the Kathmandu Refugee Reception Center, she still didn't know her best friend was dead.
The reception center staff asked me, what was the name of the dead nun? I was very shocked and I replied, what dead nun are you talking about? But deep down I knew the only one nun was left behind, so it must be her. For 5 days I hadn't known Kelsang was dead. I just cried and cried.
Safe in exile, refugees are encouraged to unburden the trauma of their experiences through drawing. The Chinese embassy in Kathmandu launched into damage control and tried to contact some of the climbers to find out what they knew about the shooting.
Some members were getting harassed phone calls every day. And I can distinctly recall Steve thinking that we were being followed, and we'd heard a rumour that the Chinese embassy were looking for us. I got to a point of thinking, right, where's my passport? I'm going to jump on the fittest-looking rickshaw driver's rickshaw and get him to take me to the British consulate and tell him what happened.
Out of fear that the Chinese may also be looking for him, Luis Benitez checked in alone to an anonymous hotel.
I remember I was sitting there watching the sunset and thinking I had no idea what I had just done, and the phone rings.
I asked him if he'd like to go to the reception centre and to meet Kelsang Namso's friends.
So Kate sends over this SUV. I don't know where he went, but you know Nepal and Kathmandu, it was over here, around this building, through a field. And we drive into this beautiful open courtyard, and the director of the center comes down to greets me and says, come into my office, I want you to meet the people that you saw on the Nangpala. I want you to meet the people you saw in the past. And they're shell-shocked. It's these group of kids that are sitting in a corner clinging to each other. And he points to Dolma, he says, this is the best friend of the 17-year-old nun that was murdered. I had thought that it was a girl. I had no idea it was a nun. I didn't know she was 17, and Dolma couldn't even look at me. And I remember just trying to keep it together and saying I was sorry, and I was sorry what had happened, but I promised that I would continue to try and make people understand what had happened. I promised that I would try to continue speaking about what had happened. I just blathered and blathered and blathered.
I was desperate to speak to eyewitnesses of the shooting. One of my friends called and said, there's a load of climbers having a steak and having a few beers. Call them now.
Phone rang, and it was somebody called Kate asking about Cho Oyu. And Phil said, I didn't see it, but I've got 2 British police officers here that did, Steve, and handed me the phone. And that was it. Name out, job out.
And I will be eternally grateful to Steve, because he was the first climber who would actually give his name, bear witness to what he'd seen.
Back in Romania, Sergiu Matai immediately went into the studio. His employer, Pro TV, fed the breaking story to the international news services.
The Chinese border guards opened fire on unarmed refugees trying to flee.
Chinese border guards on a nearby ridge appear to take aim and fire.
Within hours, Sergiu's shocking footage was making headlines all over the world. Millions of television viewers witnessed the atrocity for themselves.
China's state-run news agency said soldiers had come under attack when they...
They're shooting them like dogs.
It was the first visual documentation for 50 years of the way that Tibetans are treated in the border areas, this shooting in cold blood.
After a long road journey from Kathmandu, nearly 2/3 of the refugees who set out from Lhasa reached safe haven in Dharamsala, India. Amongst them was the man who hid in the toilet tent, Lobsang Chernden. Pulling together every scrap of visual evidence and personal testimony, Kate Saunders tracked Sergiu Matai to his home in Romania. She told him the good news. Lobsang Chernden had made it through alive.
Kate called me after a while, and she told me he made it. I was bouncing off the walls, mate. I was bouncing off the walls. Actually, it's a crack in this wall. When I smacked the wall with my palm, a crack in another one there, and the other one. Yeah, I was like all over this place, man. I was happy as a dog. Thank you. That's what I said.
In 2007, Sergiu Matai received an Emmy nomination for his news coverage of the shooting at Nangpa Pass. Life changed for Luis Benitez. Although still guiding expeditions, Luis could not remain silent. Most climbers will privately voice concerns about the fate of Tibet, but few will risk their permits by speaking publicly.
In the 4 times that I've been on Cho Oyu, I've never seen someone shot at before.
Haunted by the shooting, Luis was compelled to tell the story wherever he could. He put his own career in jeopardy, deeply dividing opinion in an industry that depends on its valuable business ties with China.
There was no choice. I kept seeing Dolma. I kept seeing the group of refugees running up the pass. And as I go, you just kind of feed it through your hand and give me slack, okay?
Luis took a break from the mountain guiding industry.
Just think it through. The pieces are there.
He now works as a senior consultant for Outward Bound Professional.
This is the story that I need to tell, and I'll never stop telling. And if I had to sacrifice a large part of what I did to do that, then that's a sacrifice that needed to be made.
Back behind the wheel of a police car in the UK, Steve Laws has no regrets for speaking out about the death of Kelsang Namso.
It wasn't until I was back in England that I found out that it was a teenage girl. Because of the nature of the job, I've seen far too much death anyway. black shape in the snow. The children affected me more than that did.
Imprisoned without trial, 14-year-old Jamyang spent 3 months in a Chinese jail. But he would not be deterred. On his release, he dared a second crossing, this time by a different route. He made it to the safety of Dharamsala in India and the Tibetan community in exile.
When I finally crossed the border, I felt so happy. I knew I had made the right decision. It felt great just to be free.
Jamyang now goes to high school with Dolma. At last, they can get the education they were denied in Tibet. And like every new arrival here, they got to meet the Dalai Lama.
When I had my audience with His Holiness, my eyes were filled with tears, and my mind was filled with joy. Because of the ordeals I went through, I was finally blessed to be in the presence of my principal Lama.
His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, told me that Kelsang died for a good cause and would therefore have a special rebirth. This advice gave me tremendous strength.
One year after the shooting, Lobsang secretly brought his wife and young family safely into India. Meeting the Dalai Lama fulfilled his dream.
His Holiness asked, "Who was the guy who hid in the toilet?" I raised my hand and said, "It's me." Then I started to cry, bawling out loud. His Holiness just said, "Don't be afraid. This has happened many times before, but we never had witnesses. You can safely speak out to the world about your ordeal, but do so honestly."
Lama